Welcome back to ProcessCast with Mark Anderson and Samantha Blake. Your go-to podcast for insights into business process management and the technologies transforming the way we work.
Okay, so imagine this. Your company just gives the green light to a project, and it's a big one. We're talking $1 billion.
Wow.
Exciting, right? But here's the thing. Statistically speaking, that project is probably going to end up a year behind schedule.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And get this, it's going to be 30% over budget.
Oof.
And if we're talking about a truly massive project like something over $5 billion, well, the challenge is they don't just double, they absolutely explode.
Yeah, like exponentially worse.
It's like the difference between running a marathon, and running an ultra marathon.
I get it a whole other level.
Totally. So for everyone listening, the big question we're really grappling with here is how can businesses effectively utilize project management tools, not just to, keep things moving, but to really supercharge productivity?
Yeah. How do we get those amazing results everyone's hoping for?
Right. Exactly. Like, how do we avoid becoming another statistic of project failure?
Totally. And for this, we've got some really interesting research to draw on.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So we've looked at Bain and Company and how they help organizations completely change their performance, through productivity improvements.
Yep.
And then we've also dug into McKinsey and Company's work, specifically on project-based services and their understanding of what it takes to lead these massive capital projects.
Right. And these aren't just, theories. They're talking about this is based on real-world experience.
Right. Their findings come from interviews with over 27 practitioners.
Wow.
Individuals who have over 500 years of combined experience.
That's a lot of experience.
It is.
Okay, so our goal here isn't to just rehash the basics of project management.
Right.
We all know the science, the methodologies, the software, the technical stuff.
And nuts and bolts.
Exactly. What we really want to dig into is what you might call the art of project leadership.
Okay, I like that.
The mindsets, the habits, the attitudes, even the subtle cultural things that really make or break a project's success.
I think that's spot on. And what's so interesting is that McKinsey's research actually emphasizes that balance. These leaders who have so much experience with huge projects, they spend about half their time talking about the methods and tools, the science part.
Right.
But the other half was all about this art of leadership.
I see.
And that's important because a lot of the traditional project management stuff kind of overlooks those softer elements, which are really crucial.
Okay, so let's dive into this art then. And let's start with something called an owner mindset.
Okay.
It sounds like it's about more than just, watching the budget.
Yeah, it definitely is. Bain and Company really emphasizes that leadership teams need to develop this owner-activist mindset.
Owner-activist. Okay.
Yeah, it's not just about cutting costs. It's about acting like an owner who strategically invests in areas that will lead to growth.
So it's more about being smart with your resources.
Exactly. It's about understanding which costs are actually helping you be competitive and then cutting the ones that aren't and then using those savings to invest strategically.
So instead of just, making deep cuts across the board, you're making smart cuts for strategic gains.
Precisely.
I like that.
Yep.
So do the sources give any practical examples of what this looks like in action?
Yeah. Bain gives this great example of a European e-commerce platform.
Okay.
They initially wanted to reduce packaging costs to be more environmentally friendly.
Makes sense.
Right? So they thought about using just standard single boxes for everything.
Right, to simplify things.
Exactly. But then they realized that some customers actually liked having the extra packaging for security and privacy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So instead of just cutting costs across the board, they made the smart decision to offer customers the option for additional packaging.
So they were still able to reduce cost overall.
Right. But they also kept their customers happy.
That's a great example of balancing cost efficiency with customer needs.
Totally. And being willing to invest where it matters.
Now, this next concept, this shape the organization from the future back idea, that's intriguing.
Yeah.
It sounds like a whole different way of thinking about strategy.
It is. Bain argues that just focusing on the present, it often leads to just small improvements.
Or incremental changes.
Exactly. But this future back idea, it's not just planning. It's about actually changing what you're doing now based on a clear vision of where you want to be in the future.
So it's like reverse engineering your success.
In a way, yeah, the really successful teams, they imagine the market 3 to 5 years down the line.
Wow, that's thinking ahead.
Right, and they figure out what their ideal position would be in that future market.
I see. So then they work backwards from there.
Exactly, and this forces you to prioritize the things that will actually get you to that future state.
Instead of just doing more of what you're already doing.
Right, it makes you think about all the changes you need to make to thrive in that future landscape.
So instead of just optimizing what we do now, we're designing our present based on where we want to be.
Exactly. And that helps you figure out not just what things cost now, but what they should cost based on how important they'll be in the future.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is, and Bain talks about this Australian radiology company that used this future-back approach to look at the market trends over the next decade.
Okay.
And it helped them identify totally new opportunities, test those opportunities against different future scenarios.
So they're prepared for different possibilities.
Exactly, and then they created a strategic roadmap with 20 major initiatives all aligned with that future state.
That's a great example of proactive and forward-thinking strategy.
It is.
But what about the fact that the future is unpredictable?
Right.
We can't know everything that's going to happen, can we?
That's a good point. You can't predict everything, but the most agile companies, according to Bain, they don't try to. Instead, they focus on the key uncertainties that are really important for their business.
The big what-ifs.
Exactly, and they develop different possible scenarios based on those uncertainties, and then they figure out the trigger points that would tell them they need to change course.
So they're constantly monitoring and adjusting.
Yeah, planning becomes this cycle of execute, monitor, and adapt.
Always ready to shift gears.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's about having a destination in mind, but also being flexible in how you get there.
Yeah, I like that.
Now let's talk about the actual work itself.
Okay.
The sources talk about redesigning work processes and using technology.
Yeah.
How does this actually boost productivity?
So both Bain and McKinsey agree that complexity is a big problem. It drives up costs and leads to bad decisions.
Makes sense. The more complex things are, the harder they are to manage.
Exactly. So to really cut costs and improve productivity, you often have to completely rethink how work gets done.
Okay.
And that's where redesigning and automating processes, using digital tools and AI comes in.
Right. So using technology to streamline things.
Yeah. For example, you could use advanced analytics to get a better understanding of your customers.
Okay.
And that allows you to serve them better and more efficiently.
Right.
Or you could use generative AI to improve the customer experience, reduce operational costs, and ultimately boost productivity.
So AI is really changing the game in a lot of ways.
It really is.
What are some specific examples of how AI is being used in project management and productivity?
McKinsey talks about this really interesting area called repair analytics in industrial companies.
Repair analytics, okay.
Yeah, so instead of just waiting for equipment to break down,
Right.
companies are now using sensors and analytics to constantly monitor the health of their machinery.
So they can fix things before they become big problems.
Exactly. It means less downtime, fewer emergency repairs, and faster problem solving overall.
So it's good for costs and for the customer experience.
Exactly. But McKinsey also emphasizes that to make this work, you need to have really strong collaboration between all the teams involved.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about how people use it.
Right. It has to be integrated into the whole system.
What other technologies are making a big difference in project productivity?
Well, AI and machine learning are super powerful for predictive maintenance, like we were just talking about.
Right, being able to anticipate problems.
Exactly. By tracking assets in real time and analyzing all that data,
Okay.
you can predict when something's going to fail and fix it before it actually does.
And that minimizes disruptions.
Yeah. McKinsey also talks about the increasing use of augmented reality, or AR, for field technicians.
AR.
Yeah, imagine a technician working on a remote site and they can get step-by-step guidance from an expert back at headquarters through an AR interface on their tablet or headset.
It's like having a virtual expert right there with them.
Exactly, and that can speed up troubleshooting and problem solving in all sorts of industries.
What about something as simple as digitizing manual processes? Is that still a big deal for productivity?
It is. Bain says that digitizing those repetitive manual tasks,
Okay.
using analytics to figure out the best practices, and creating easy-to-use performance dashboards can lead to some pretty big productivity gains,
How big are we talking?
often between 10 and 30%.
That's significant.
It's all about using data to streamline workflows and make better decisions.
Okay, so we've talked about the right mindsets, the power of technology. Now let's get into what McKinsey calls the art of project leadership.
Okay.
This seems like where things get really interesting, especially with those mega projects.
It is McKinsey argues that leading these multi-billion-dollar projects requires a different kind of leadership, almost like a CEO.
Wow.
It's not just about construction management, it's about managing a whole range of organizational challenges.
Okay.
One of the most important things they emphasize is defining a really clear project purpose, identity, and culture.
So more than just financial targets.
Exactly. It needs to go beyond the budget and the technical specs.
I see.
The most successful projects, they often aim to create a lasting positive impact on the people involved and the communities they touch.
Okay.
Think about things like the Apollo program, putting a man on the moon, or the Hoover Dam, which transformed water supply and agriculture in the West.
Right. These were huge undertakings with a broader purpose.
Exactly. And that shared purpose, it helps to unite all the different stakeholders around a common vision.
So it gives people a deeper sense of meaning.
Right. And it encourages commitment beyond just completing tasks.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And this ties into their next point about leading as a business, not just as a project.
Yeah.
These massive projects are more like running a company than just managing a construction project.
Totally. You're dealing with partner relationships, stakeholders, regulations, team building, employee retention.
Wow. It's like a whole ecosystem.
It is. It's not just a temporary thing. It has long-lasting effects.
Okay. Now, what about the relationship with contractors? How does that affect project productivity?
McKinsey is very clear on this. You need to make sure your contractor is successful.
Okay.
The best projects, they have a true partnership between the owner and the contractor based on trust and collaboration.
So it's a we're in this together kind of approach.
Exactly. It's a we win together or we lose together mentality.
I like that.
Yeah, you have to align incentives, define responsibilities, and really invest in building that trust.
Because if there's no trust, things can get messy.
They even tell a story about a project where there was a lack of trust early on. Yeah, and it led the contractor to focus on creating all these reports to protect themselves from blame instead of actually solving problems.
So it created more bureaucracy and slowed things down.
Exactly. It was all about covering their you-know-what instead of actually fixing things.
So the project owner has to set the tone for collaboration from the beginning.
Right, exactly. It's about establishing the right behavior so that everyone works together constructively.
Makes sense. Now, another interesting point they make is about balancing trust in processes with leadership judgment.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, trust your processes, but know that leadership is required.
That's a great way to put it. It's not one or the other. You need both.
Right.
You have to have solid processes in place and make sure people follow them.
Okay.
But these huge projects, they always have unexpected challenges that no process can predict perfectly.
Right.
So good leaders, they understand the limits of processes and they know when it's necessary to deviate from them.
So it's about being flexible when you need to be.
Exactly. It's about using judgment, not just blindly following rules.
And what about the importance of upfront planning? Everyone always talks about how crucial that is.
McKinsey definitely agrees that investing heavily in front-end loading, or FEL, is really important.
FEL, okay.
Yeah, it's basically that initial planning phase. The more you get right up front, the better your chances of success.
Because once the project is in motion, it's harder to make changes.
Exactly. But they also acknowledge that with ultra-large projects, there's always going to be some uncertainty.
Right, because they're so big and complex.
Exactly. Even with the best planning, you can't foresee everything.
So you need leaders who can handle that uncertainty.
Yeah, leaders who can adapt and make good decisions even when things are unpredictable.
Okay, and finally on this point, they talk about using proven processes effectively.
Right.
That seems kind of obvious, but is there more to it?
Yeah. They say that a lot of companies have documented processes,
Okay.
but they're not always used effectively. It's not enough to just have the documentation. You have to make sure the teams actually understand the principles behind the processes.
So it's not just about going through the motions.
Exactly. It's about understanding why you're doing things a certain way.
So they could adapt the process when necessary.
Right.
Okay, we've covered the mindsets, the technology, the leadership. Now let's talk about the people doing the work. How do you keep them productive and engaged over the course of these long and complex projects?
McKinsey is very clear on this. Capital projects are delivered by people.
Right.
So investing in team effectiveness is absolutely essential.
Correct.
This means things like personal development programs, formal training, on-the-job coaching, and mentorship.
So helping people grow and develop their skills.
Exactly, especially when it comes to the art of leadership. So much of that knowledge comes from experience and mentorship.
And what about team stability? These projects can last for years.
Yeah, maintaining continuity is really important, according to McKinsey.
Okay.
The less turnover you have, the better.
Because you don't want to lose that project knowledge.
Right. but they also say that at certain points in the project, like when you're transitioning from construction to commissioning,
Right.
you might need to bring in people with specific skills for that next phase.
Makes sense.
They also talk about right-sizing the team.
Right-sizing, okay.
Yeah, making sure you don't have too many people because that can actually create more complexity and slow things down.
So it's not always about more people, more productivity.
Exactly. Sometimes less is more.
Now, a big source of delays in projects is often decision-making.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What do the sources say about improving that?
McKinsey emphasizes the importance of delegating decisions to the lowest appropriate level.
So empowering people to make decisions.
Exactly. But that delegation has to be based on trust.
Right.
Trust in the systems and in the people.
Okay.
When leaders trust their teams to handle things, they can focus on the really big problems.
That makes sense. And they also point out that most project delays aren't caused by one big event.
Right.
It's the accumulation of lots of small delays.
It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
So being able to make decisions quickly and effectively is crucial.
Yeah, to avoid those micro delays.
And how should we be approaching performance management on these large projects?
McKinsey says that performance management meetings should be forward-looking and action-oriented.
Okay.
They should be based on data, but the focus should be on deciding what to do next, not just reviewing what's already happened.
So being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
Finally, let's talk about the human element. How do you actually drive the right attitudes and behaviors within the team and recognize that these are individuals with their own challenges?
Good leaders, they inspire their teams by defining and communicating the expected behaviors.
Okay.
But even more importantly, by actually modeling those behaviors themselves.
Leading by example.
Exactly. McKinsey says that role modeling is much more powerful than just having formal processes or policies.
Actions speak louder than words.
Totally. They also say that you have to be transparent about the project's priorities.
Especially when it comes to those trade-offs between cost, time, and quality.
Yeah, when everyone understands the big picture, they can make better decisions.
Right.
And another thing that's really important is taking the time to connect with individual team members.
Okay.
Build relationships. Listen to their concerns.
Because these projects can be really stressful.
They can. And when you have those strong relationships, it creates a sense of shared commitment.
And given how complex and constantly changing these projects are, it's important to have consistent messaging across all communication channels.
Absolutely. You have to repeat key messages frequently and in different ways so that they really sink in.
Right. And finally, McKinsey acknowledges the personal and professional risks involved in these projects.
Yeah.
And the pressure that leaders and their teams face.
They recommend building understanding and support with the families of team members.
Okay.
And actively monitoring the well-being of everyone involved, especially during those final phases of the project.
It sounds like it's as much about managing people as it is about managing tasks and budgets.
It is. They're completely intertwined.
You can have the best tools and processes in the world.
Yeah.
But if your team isn't motivated and aligned, it won't matter.
Exactly. Productivity will suffer.
So to bring it all back to our original question about how to use project management tools to boost productivity,
all right.
It's clear that the answer is a combination of things.
It is. It's about blending the science of project management with the art of project leadership.
Okay.
You need the methodologies, the tools, the technical skills.
Right.
But you also need the mindsets, the practices, the cultural elements.
The human element.
Exactly. You need to cultivate that owner mindset.
Okay.
Proactively shape your future strategy.
Right.
Redesign your work processes with technology and invest in your teams.
And foster a strong culture and lead with business savvy.
Exactly. All of those things are crucial for achieving those extraordinary results.
So for you, the listener, the question to ask is your organization focusing enough on the art of project leadership?
Good question.
Are you really tapping into the full potential for productivity gains by nurturing these softer elements within your projects?
Yeah.
Maybe focusing on these areas is the key to breaking free from those industry statistics.
It might be.
And achieving truly remarkable outcomes.
Yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about.
So we encourage you to dig into those source materials we talked about today.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear about your own experiences and any questions you have about boosting project productivity and the art of leadership.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to ProcessCast. This episode was brought to you by HEFLO, the BPM platform that empowers businesses to document, automate, and optimize their processes with AI. Experience the intelligence to simplify complex business processes and accelerate your growth with our complete management solution. Visit HEFLO.com to learn more. Be sure to follow ProcessCast for more insights on business process management, and don't forget to share this episode with your network. Until next time.